These are two of my granddaughters. Nyla, wearing the Gymnast for Life jacket, is 11, and her sister Emma is 9. When they were 8 and 6 respectively, we would often go to the beach. On one afternoon, as we approached the receding tide at New Smyrna, Emma inquired of me if there were sharks in the water. I said yes, but that they were far, far out beyond where we would be swimming. Emma then continued to tell me that sharks bite, and that she did not want to be bitten by a shark. Later that day, I asked her dad, my son Hank, where Emma had learned about sharks. He said they had been watching documentaries and had seen Shark Week on Netflix. Watching documentaries on Netflix. Our children are like sponges in that they absorb information that is presented to them, and then they decide when they will use it. Sometimes this information is good and accurate, and sometimes it is not. The cycle of oppression is a tool for us to use in examining the where and how we came upon the information we have acquired about race and ethnicity. It exists, and it is important, even critical, that we examine our past to determine how we can interrupt and remove ourselves from its influence to find a new racial identity for ourselves and simultaneously learn about the racial identity of others. I first learned about this important concept in the mid-1990s from two of my mentors, Dr. Andrea Vajian and Dr. Beverly Tatum, both professors at Mount Holyoke College in Western Massachusetts at the time. Let me share a few personal anecdotes to make the cycle real and come to life, beginning in our early years. When I was in the 4th grade, every day before school, my male classmates and I would meet on the playground for a game of punchball. This was a game just like baseball and had all of the same rules. The only piece of equipment needed was a teensy pinky ball. It was a little bit smaller than a tennis ball and pink in color. When you bought it at the local candy store for 25 cents, you would always put your initials on it and then place a tiny hole with a straight pin in one end so that just enough air came out during play. You see, to put the ball in play, you had to punch it with a closed fist. And if someone forgot to prick the new ball, man, it would hurt like striking a cement wall. Various cracks in the playground's asphalt served as the basis for our game. Home plate, first, second, and third. Usually, the first two boys to arrive would be the captains to choose the teams, and other students arriving each morning would be selected as they showed up. I've got Mike. I'll take Curtis and Richard. Here comes Benny. Hey, Benny, we're in the field first. Come on. Paul, hurry up. It's your turn to hit after Hank. This banter would echo across the playground as each boy arrived. Funny, none of the girls were ever chosen. No girls being chosen wasn't the only thing that was out of order in our game. There was this one boy named Brian, you see. He was a real good athlete and a good top punchball player. He could hit the ball far, throw with accuracy, run the bases like a speeding car, and catch anything that was hit near him like a vacuum. But Brian was almost always the last person picked, even if he had arrived in plenty of time to be selected. You see, the boys, all of us, African American, thought that Brian was too dark, and we might catch something if we got too close. So where, I wonder, did we 4th grade boys, all African American, all 9 and 10 years old, come to find out that there was something wrong with being too dark? I remember that my parents had said to me growing up, if you don't know the meaning of a word, get the dictionary and look it up. Now, I taught a professional development course for educators similar to the one you are now experiencing for 10 years. And in each school or synagogue or community center or church where I taught and presented, I would always ask for a copy of the dictionary that the students were using. And I'd look up 2 words during the presentation, the word black and the word white. And here's a sample of what I would find. The word black was described as cloudy, dingy, murky, shadowy, somber, hopeless, bleak, dismal, gloomy, sinister, threatening, dirty, nasty, or soiled. Whereas the word white, the antonym of black, was often described as pure, blameless, without sin, new, spotless, faultless, graceful, neat, hygienic, tidy, and well kept. Somewhere in my early years, I had received and used some negative information about the meaning of these 2 words, black and white. Dr. Tatum shared the following anecdote. In her class for graduate students entitled The Psychology of Racism, Students were required to complete a field experience to find out where children learned about race and ethnicity. One of her class members chose to go to a local nursery school to ask the children what they knew about Native Americans. After the graduate student was introduced to the 3- and 4-year-olds, the student distributed paper and markers and pens to have the children draw pictures of Native Americans. But they all had a puzzled look on their faces because they did not know what a Native American was. But when the graduate student asked them to draw pictures of Indians, they quickly got to work. And when they were done, they were asked to hold up their finished products. They all did proudly, and the graduate student immediately noticed that all of the pictures had two things in common. Each figure depicted had a feather, and each picture was carrying some kind of a weapon. The graduate student inquired of the children where they had learned that all Indians had a feather and carried a weapon. And almost in unison, the 3- and 4-year-olds replied, "Peter Pan, Peter Pan, we just saw the movie Peter Pan, and that's what they look like." What do you know about the contributions of different racial and ethnic groups to the success of the United States in World War II? Who were the members of the 332nd Fighter Group? What was the role of Native Americans to the war effort? Was learning about the Bracero program part of your high school studies of World War II? Why is the voyage of the St. Louis important to know about in this historical era? What was the role of women in World War II? None of these examples was part of my study of U.S. history while I was in high school. Why, I wondered. Each of these examples, Brian, the graduate student, and our recollection of what we were taught about for the Second World War, all happened in our early years, and they were shaped by some kind of misinformation, missing history, biased history, and stereotypes. Then, through a process of socialization, we were acquiring a personal identity and learning the norms and values of our environment, and thus the cycle became reinforced. Without any blame, shame, or guilt, stereotypes, omissions, and distortions become reinforced by people that we know, love, and care about. Family members, friends, teachers, government, or in a case that I reflected on, a house of worship. Beginning at age 9, right around the time of my punchball game, I began to sing in a boys' choir at Grace Episcopal Church in Jamaica, New York. This turned out to be one of my most memorable times growing up. We choir boys were at church for rehearsing 3 days a week after school and then for Sunday services. And I remember the stained glass windows surrounding the walls of the church, many of them depicting a picture of Jesus, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed man. Many years later, I would get quite a surprise about the depiction of Jesus that I had grown up with. After reading the book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X, and then seeing the movie, I learned that during his time of incarceration, Malcolm did a lot of reading, and he also attended many prayer services. It was here that he challenged a priest about the actual likeness of Jesus by quoting from the Bible, Revelations chapter 1, verses 14 and 15. Jesus' hair was like wool, and his skin like brass. Why, I wondered, were the stained glass windows at my church depicting Jesus in an inaccurate way? Along with others, the reinforcement of the cycle was now internalized, and we began to collude and view misinformation as being the truth, and the cycle continued. I can still remember playing punchball as a 6th grader and telling the younger students to stay away from Brian and others who were too dark. The cycle of oppression can be interrupted, although it does create dissonance whenever we step off of the cycle as we try to be more inclusive and also show accurate information as we travel down that path to liberation. Now I'd like to call on you to reflect on your own early years, and through a lens of race and ethnicity, find those instances of missing history, biased history, misinformation, and stereotypes that you remember. Then reflect on how this all was reinforced for you and by whom. With whom did you collude and pass on the missing information as being truth? Lastly, reflect on this question. Who was the number one pick in the 1999 professional basketball draft?